I'll get you the link. Okay, so this is the Open RFC meeting for the NPM CLI for August 24th, 2022. And just like everybody to be reminded of the code of conduct that applies to this meeting and to discussions and issues and RFCs. And we're going to cover a pretty short agenda today. We're going to talk about some defaults and the ongoing discussion for package linking. And yeah, so it should be pretty quick, and then we'll have some announcements on what we're going to be doing for the next month or two after this. So let's go ahead and dive in. So it looks like Miles has an RFC for changing the default auth type to web. Can anyone speak to this?
I mean, I'm not a fan of having the current way be called legacy. I don't think we need to editorialize in our option values, but beyond that, it seems fine. It's an easy NPM RC change if I want it different.
Perfect. Any other comments on this? Any strong opinions?
I mean, I will say that, like, it's annoying to have to jump to a web browser. Like, this doesn't affect what the default has to be, right? It's why I would change it for me. But like, I've configured sudo on my terminal to use Touch ID even, and like being able to do that on the command line, that would make the usability, because like then I could use my security key or whatever, right on the command line. That's immensely powerful. Jumping to a web browser is like, I guess it's fine, but it's not that much better than me just using a two-factor code.
Right.
Like in terms of user experience, right? Like security wise it's a different discussion, but that's like also half a feature request. So like that also doesn't have to determine the defaults. Just throwing that out there.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and let's get the notes in there for that issue, that RFC, so that we can get that discussion going and make a decision. Let's move on to only registry dependencies, the next item in the agenda. When installing dependencies, the NPM CLI should have a mechanism for communicating and optionally failing on dependencies that do not come from the registry. Can anyone here speak to that? Oh, is my volume low? Is this better, Gar?
Yeah, it's better for me anyway. So I think Owen was here last meeting, like giving an update, and 2 days ago the PR has been updated. So I think maybe it just needs all of us to take a relook at it. I think the general concept, just to repeat, that I think we tossed around was to kind of build up an NPM audit something framework, and where one of those things would be a shortcut command for an NPM query command you can run, which will tell you if you have any non-registry dependencies in your tree.
Right.
So I haven't taken a fresh look at it in the last 2 days, but I imagine that we can review that, and then the next time Owen's in a meeting, we'd be able to discuss anything with him that needed discussing.
Yep. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, just point out that I reviewed it after the last meeting, and left a bunch of notes, and I see that they're all cleaned up. I think, like, yeah, editorial wise, it's definitely ready to be ratified. Like our document looks good now.
The NPM audit stuff is out of band too. That stuff we eventually want to have NPM query have the ability to exit cleanly or uncleanly that has results, but that shouldn't affect this RFC. That just fell out of the discussion.
Yeah, but like separate from that, like the query infrastructure can easily be used for the command, right? But the
Oh, we fully plan on it under the hood. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, of course. But yeah, I just kind of meant like, so I don't comment on the PR, but I see he's got like npm audit dash dash only registry deps. So like what I had envisioned at least was a set of subcommands like under audit, npm audit vulnerabilities, npm audit dependencies, npm audit licenses, npm audit whatever people come up with. So it's extensible in that way. And then configuration, once we get command specific config, a configuration structure that lets you determine which of those checks runs with npm, with a bare npm audit, whether which of them runs with on npm install, and that when they run in each of those places, like whether they warn or fail or are silent or like off completely. That was sort of what I'd envisioned, and it seems like we could build in that direction without blocking this RFC on that system by fitting into that design. But I haven't heard any objections every time I brought it up. I just keep bringing it up because I want to like make sure that it's fresh in people's heads.
Oh yeah, maybe leave a note in the.
Yeah,
PR
I'll
then.
do that when I leave my comments on this one.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm muted. There's also going to be an RFC coming up dealing with saved queries and just the ability to use and reference queries as filters and other commands, so that'll be interesting to see how this interacts with this from an implementation and a config perspective. But I think we'll get there.
Will that include a way to like have npm packages provide queries so that they can be easily shared and distributed?
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I think we were mostly looking at being able to save package or save queries and name them in the package JSON or the npm RFC. And yeah, it could be interesting to access the queries of dependencies.
Sort of like I have like queries and dev queries and something better than that, but like so that I can intentionally say these are the queries that I'm exposing as part of my packages API.
Yeah,
these are the ones I'm using for myself.
I hadn't thought about that. Hey, and a wild Owen has appeared, so maybe Owen can speak more to this. Here's the HackMD link, Owen. Can you speak real quick to the only registry dependencies changes that you made recently?
Yeah, the last round of changes was just from Roy. There was some bike shedding and outdated like comments and links that he suggested could be cleaned up and removed. So I just attended to that. So yeah, I think that at this point it's kind of ready for whatever happens next after that.
You're muted. Let's see.
Thanks for that, Owen. Before you came on, Jordan was reminding us that he likes subcommands, like categories.
I'll leave some comments that try to document the vision I have, but it's not like it's like an editorial change. It's not like an observable change to what you're talking about.
The RFC, yeah, because I think Darcy had shared like a follow-up HackMD that has like all the visionary elements to that. So I'm not sure if it's worth linking to that in the RFC or whatever, but because I think there's a lot we know we could do with it, but I think we're siloing that away per se.
All right. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, so the big one is 626 RFC for linking packages to their source. So this has obviously been a big discussion the last few RFC meetings. Can someone speak to this and summarize the intent and where it's at?
Yes, I can do that. So I think there are like a few ways of looking at it, but one way to summarize it is that we want to add, well, this is really adding a new capability to NPM, which is the ability to sign metadata about a package before it hits NPM. So it's not NPM signing it, it's some other entity. And in this RFC, we are proposing to sign it using an ID token, which is an OIDC ID token from a CI/CD provider. And there are some other alternatives of potentially using an email, a login, or a proof of email login, as well as like the more traditional approach is using a private key, for example, that the developer manages. And we want to use this information to link a package kind of verifiably or non-falsifiably to the source repository and build more. It's not really, yeah, it's like the build, run, or workflow that executed the job.
So the last, I don't know, handful of comments on there are, I think I'm having a growing suspicion that this is sort of like putting the cart before the horse or whatever. Like this is that the actual thing that matters, the only thing that matters is if the package contents are good or not.
Mm-hmm.
And good is a bigger question than does it match the repo, for sure, because the repo could be bad, but does it match the repo is a very strong and important indicator for whether it might be good or not. Because if it does match the repo, then you have a version control to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And right. Okay. So, but this doesn't tell you that for historical packages, and it doesn't even necessarily tell you that for CI/CD things, because if I've compromised the repo, I can compromise the CI/CD build process, and I can sign whatever I want. So, and admittedly, if I've compromised the repo, I can do whatever I want anyway. But the like, it just seems like on its face, this is like, or at first blush or whatever, this like seems like it's a useful thing to verify. And I don't see the only downsides I see from doing this, aside from inherent complexity and the work involved, is a likely unintended consequence of social pressure pushing people to do something unnecessary for their packages that may or may not actually achieve the ultimate goal that matters, which is reliable packages. So it sort of feels to me like if we first had a system that could, for all old and new packages, do some sort of post-publish verification and build process, like repeat a build process and use heuristics to figure out a confidence level of like how much it matches the repo, that is a much more useful application of time and effort and money than this would be. And it would also make this specific RFC much more valuable, because at that time, like the ability to sign, like if you see a build process where like the signature doesn't match or whatever, you then could look and see, well, but the contents match the repo. So, okay, so maybe there's something weird, like we have to look, but maybe we don't need to raise alarm bells. Whereas like, okay, the contents don't match the repo and the signature's wrong, that's where the problem is. Or the contents don't match the repo and the signature's right, so now the problem's in the repo. Like this is helping narrow down the triage and debugging, but it can't really do that until you have, like, you can't do that very effectively, I think, until you have that sort of post-package verification built in. And the current state of post-package verification is, has someone filed a CVE about it yet? And is that CVE like invalid or not? Most of them are, right? And then like, so I don't know, it feels like this is all valuable work at some point. I'm having a growing suspicion that we're not at that point yet.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't argue with the value of having that information about legacy packages. That would be awesome. But in my mind, like this is kind of the building block that we would be building on to do that. So if we have a way to sign metadata, this would be for new packages that maintainers have explicitly opted into. And then we could use the same infrastructure to have a NPM rebuilder, for example, that's like trying to rebuild the package. And if it succeeds, it will sign it with its key and then upload it on the same.
I agree that in both of those systems, like Sigstore or something like it would make sense, right? But the work in this RFC has nothing to do with that. Sigstore is already being worked on, right? Those like in other words, the two things we're talking that your RFC and this like system I'm vaguely describing, these two things overlap, but they're not actually building blocks one over the other. They're separate bits of information that you would use to make a decision about a package or debug a package. And I'm sort of, my suspicion is that it's not actually all that useful to have this RFC unless you also have that other bit. That in practice, right? Like it's sort of like there's all these, if you go Google, you can find like all these proof of concepts about, look at all the ways that NPM packages can attack you. And like the vast majority of them are theoretically valid, but nobody's ever actually pulled one off. And so like, maybe they're not that important to protect against because they've been gaping security holes for a long time and nobody's actually succeeded in exploiting it, right? And so like, in that example, it would be sort of security theater to build a system that stopped attacks that no one's ever actually exploited. And it wouldn't actually be valuable, even though it seems valuable in theory. And so like my sort of growing fear is that that's what this RFC would be, is something that seems like it solves a problem, but doesn't actually in practice solve a real problem. And yet, and it might in the future, right? Like I think it's just, I don't see how it's going to help all that much. It seems like the main effect it would have is like forcing maintainers to do extra work in order to get some check mark or badge or whatever somewhere. And then like, or, you know, to not appear in the scary results of somebody's like fly-by-night security analysis tool. And then like, but we haven't actually solved the root problem of like how to prevent packages from being compromised. You know, or maintainers from going rogue, both of which are the real concerns. So like I'm really trying to like figure out a way to solve the underlying problem, which is the same underlying problem we're all trying to solve. How can we increase everyone's security, right? So I'm not trying to like rain on your parade or burst your bubble here. Like this is valuable work and it is never wasted. Like it will be useful at some point regardless. I'm just not entirely sure if we're at the stage yet where it's going to be the most valuable in terms of prioritization and stuff.
I guess a quick point before Eddie. I mean, in my mind, this would be the same as what you're talking about, but only for new packages. So it would give you the same guarantees. It wouldn't be like reproducing the repo to package, but it would kind of prevent.
But only for new packages that opt in.
Yes.
Many old packages are done or their maintainers are dead or like, and so like, and these are still perfectly fine packages. So like, and the number of old packages is larger than every other language's packages combined. So like, it's sort of, this is the reason I'm going more towards the system I'm describing is because solving old and new packages seems like a strictly better solution than solving new packages that opt in. You know,
I mean, in my mind, this is like, I would like to get to the point where we do it for all packages, but this to me seems like an easiest thing to start with, because actually reproducing packages unearths like a whole other set of questions that we haven't even begun to answer. Like, do people need to opt in? Do they actually want this stuff to happen to their old packages? The reproduction rate is kind of lossy. some efforts. There's actually some effort internally at GitHub to do this, and they get up to 80%. I think there's a team at Microsoft that try and do this, and they have got to maybe 90+%, which is awesome. But it's not like they have loads of heuristics. I think you still get some kind of estimate. So I'd love to get there, but in my mind, that would be actually more work upfront than adding this kind of building block for new packages that opt in.
Eddie?
Eddie?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know if folks have seen the PyPI attack that happened earlier today. Python package maintainers were targeted with phishing attacks, and they published, there were 2 known packages that got published due to compromised PyPI accounts as of 4 hours ago. So I'm not sure if they were, if they've announced more yet, or people have come forward or found them yet. But that's one of the things that's just like, this is a real-time example that happened this morning of like one of the things that we're trying to prevent here. And like, this had nothing to do with, you know, just the release wasn't published from a trusted builder, right? Like, I'm sure this happened from whatever attacker they were using. Like, I'm sure these packages were downloaded by people, right? And some pipeline somewhere. So this is why I like the idea of, you know, the signing of the packages in general, and having the CLI enforce that the maintainers are the ones who shipped it. So I wanted to raise that in case folks haven't been on Twitter yet.
I mean, so it sounds like you're, just to make sure I'm understanding, you're saying this, the attacker here compromised their registry account, but not their repo, and
Correct.
thus not the build process. And so you're saying this would address this. It seems another alternative would be, at the time of publish, you have to confirm that you still have access to the repo and the registry, right? And in the case of NPM and GitHub, where they're the same company, right? Like that's, and now that there's an actual link on the website, like that seems like something that should be easy to automatically verify. You just make, on the server, you just make the API calls and you're like, yep, you're still the same 2 people, or you like ask for 2-factor code from both, right? Like, so it's, you're right. I agree with you. This RFC would solve that specific problem. But like, it's not the only way, and may not even be the best way to solve it. But thank you for bringing that up. That's interesting to read about.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, just I guess, Philip, a question for you, because I think this was something that Jordan said about like the overlap between this effort that's proposed in the RFC and potentially doing something where we're like rebuilding old packages and, you know, trying to make some attestations about those. It seems like there is a fair amount of overlap between those 2 things, right? I mean, I'm as part of this effort, there's a lot of like underlying infrastructure that's going to get built out as far as like, how do we store these attestations? How do they get linked to the NPM packages? How do they get retrieved at verification time? That would obviously like serve as a stepping stone to doing further work in the future. Is that like accurate?
Yeah, I think that like anything outside the CLI could be reused. And the work in the CLI is actually not that big in terms of the whole project.
Yeah. Thanks.
Is there a reason not to start this outside of NPM? Like this is just pushing, like people could run a separate command before they run npm publish or whatever, or even they don't even have to run it with npm publish. They could just run their build process in CI and then run a command that pushes a checksum or whatever into SigStore. And then if assuming the build process produces the same results on their local machine, they could just publish from their local machine and it would still be verifiable in the same way, right? Like, or they could publish from CI as they like, and that doesn't require any changes in NPM. Is there a reason not to start with that? Because then you would be able to get a bunch of projects to try it out, kind of test SigStore's infra, like with real load, test the user experience, like show some proofs of concepts of tools that would use this actual information about real packages. Like,
yeah.
I mean, is there a reason it has to go in NPM first? Is sort of the question.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of already been done. Like the Google open source security team have released a bunch of Salsa trusted builders that you can run as reusable actions workflows that generate provenance statement and put it on recall, sign it and put it on recall. The problem with that, it's like, yes, we can test out this signing and publishing step, but then the attestation can't really be fetched in a good way for the CLI. Like you can't verify it in an easy way. Like you'd have to explicitly fetch a single attestation from recall. There's no way to like really build any added capabilities on top of that from NPM's perspective, like being able to detect changes.
But I mean, you'd need regardless, you'd need the ability to get a tree's worth of packages attestations from Recore for NPM to be able to do anything useful with validation on the client side. So like that seems like something that's a precondition anyway. And if that exists, then you could type npx check Recore stuff and it just grabs your tree, like, or sends your lock file to Recore and then like or to some service and then gets, like that also, like any work that NPM would need to do needs to be done, or like any work that would need to be done without NPM needs to be done with it anyway. There's like the only real difference I see in integrating it into NPM is that it becomes like exponentially more visible, more used by default, and more and then any unintended consequences of it will become like unavoidable. And it seems like it's worth working out all the kinks before we like broadcast it to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Like in a way, we have some of that stuff already. Like these builders do that for, you can do that for Go, Docker. And we could in theory,
opting in to use them.
We could there are projects using them. Cool. We could in theory build like a verification step, but then a big goal of this project is actually making it easy to use and kind of as on default as possible. I think without that, you don't really get the benefit. Like we can sign these things already with a JavaScript 6.0 client and push these to recall. But I think the selling point to me is like actually making it easy to use and integrate it into NPM.
It takes a very long time for like even if NPM did this by default, the amount of time it would take for me to publish an update to all hundreds of my packages, and then on top of that, the amount of time it would take for all consumers to actually update them, it's very, very, very long. We're talking like half a decade minimum. So like that's another sort of reason why I pushed something that doesn't require any maintainer action and works for all old packages, because even if it's more work, then everyone automatically gets it for every package for free, or 80% of packages for free, right? Versus having to wait for that very slow kind of trickle down thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't argue with that. I'm more like arguing the phasing of the work. So I would want to do that as a fun follow up to this work.
Gotcha.
Roy?
Yeah, I think I just like to highlight to Jordan. I believe there is a big potential here for actually an awesome like developer experience in the future. Once all of this is in place, like everything can just be integrated directly from GitHub. You can just push a button and release your publish your package to the registry automatically, right? Like once all the builders are in place and then the CLI will be able to validate all that. But yeah, from what I understand, it's definitely outside of the scope. Any other improvement is definitely outside of the scope of the work being done now. So it's more of a foundational block, I guess, to get there someday. But yeah, I can see a future where this enables for a much better experience publishing packages, and maybe that will push the adoption faster than we would expect normally.
Yeah, I mean, I think another philosophy that I hold in general is that if something requires special privilege to gain adoption, like, so for example, like the Google AMP stuff or the like GitHub Dependabot, like if Dependabot being a first class feature in GitHub is what's required for people to use it, then maybe it's not actually better than the alternatives. Whereas if the only difference by making it first class is that, you know, the adoption scales very fast, then like maybe it's good and, you know, it has the first class integration, right? So like kind of the only way you can prove it's a usable solution is if it's unprivileged and people are still adopting it, right? And like, you know, because anything that's default in NPM is going to be easier to use, even if there's annoying aspects to it. But like, if nobody's going to do it unless it's an NPM, like my intuition is that means it's not a good enough experience yet. And I'm not making that claim that no one's using it. I'm just saying like a GIF.
Yeah, I mean, this is good feedback. Like we can, I think, as part of this project, think about ways we could incrementally ship this thing, and that might be one way of doing it.
Frederick?
Hello. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I'm on the road. But in short, I do think there is value in being able to link where something came from, in the sense that I, as a consumer of packages, being able to go fetch the repo and to be able to say that this package through some secure path generated this, was generated from this source. And that means that any analysis on that source that I do at that moment, I know is going to apply to that specific package. So it prevents me from having to go and rebuild it from the front or in the back end myself. So while I agree that it does not solve a whole bunch of other things, like it's not a silver bullet to a lot of the problems that are there, from the perspective of owning or working in a large infrastructure that has this kind of stuff, having that ability to track from where this thing was publicly, and then being able to rely on not just ourselves, but to be able to share information like, we analyze this package, this is what our outcomes are with other companies, and there's special ways we have in order to share that thread information with other organizations, and for them to share it with us would be a useful building block towards getting that, and being able to say this package has had this kind of analysis by these many types of organizations. So I want to list that as a possibility of the things that we don't get today that we could if all we do is we have that linkage there with cryptographic some attestation that was provided, and that would require. I don't think that verification from source to destination would require any action on the developers other than when they initially wire it up and hit the run button as to where it fetches.
That's what I like about it, is that even if the developer is deceased, you can still achieve the same guarantee on their previously published packages. And there are a number of very popular packages whose developers are dead, right? So, like, yeah, I like any example or any option that requires no maintainer input for the default good experience. Maintainer action for better stuff is one thing, but you know, if the default is no action, you can't get any easier than that.
Yeah, and just to finish an idea there as well, even if we don't end up with every package on there, like let's say that's impossible because the source was initially on some developer's desktop, they've passed away, all that information is pretty much gone, wiped, etc. So even if we have situations that are like that, if I can tell like 80% of my packages are recent in the past year or so, I don't have that statistic, so I don't use that like in literature or anything. But if we have something there, like that still moves the needle. It still allows me to make to analyze and make attestations about things that are there. And then I know that things that don't have that are things that we have to pay special attentions to as well. So so it doesn't have to be perfect 100%. Even if all it does is move the needle, it's still valuable.
All right. Are we at a good stopping point for discussion on this issue today? Is there anyone else wants to add? Any next actions we need to take in order to move this forward? All right. Then let's move on. I just wanted to make some announcements. We worked through the agenda today, unless somebody has something to add. But I did want to mention by way of announcement that we're not going to be having open RFC meetings for the next few weeks. We're instead going to be doing office hours in which we can still discuss these RFC items. There just won't be a formal agenda. So we'll just be NPM CLI employees able to answer questions. We can discuss whatever we want to discuss about this. We can keep moving, particularly this package linking RFC forward. It'll just be a little less formal and try to encourage some new faces to come and a more casual experience. We're doing this because we're getting more heads down on the CLI team right now. We're going to start on breaking changes for NPM 9. So we're just kind of shifting modes internally here to get that out the door. Any questions on that? Any further business?
Maybe one last announcement. Just shipped Node 18.8 today, and that was first version to include NPM query on the current line. So yeah, that was that. It's nice.
That's exciting. It's really, yeah, like your work landing has been, I think the possibility space is huge. So as the community discovers NPM query and as we start using it for more and more things internally within NPM, I think it's going to get legs. I think people are going to get excited about it. So congratulations, Roy.
Thanks. Yeah, I was happy to see that ship.
Owen?
Yeah, I guess on the NPM query is a good segue back to the office hours. So I think Darcy had mentioned last week that, I guess, presuming there's nothing stopping the registry only dependencies, would I'd be able to take advantage of those office hours because I'd like to help contribute the solution to that if possible. And yeah, so just wanted to get an idea of, I guess I can just reach out in Slack. Would that be a good place to start, or what's that?
You want to use it to kind of like a pair programming thing?
I guess, yeah, probably both. One, just to maybe just kind of get a quick overview of the code and maybe kind of like help zero in on where that path might be and some pointers, and yeah, then I could start experimenting. And yeah, I guess mostly just to kind of gauge if you would think it's like a small, medium, or large kind of task.
That's my wheelhouse. So yeah, I'll make sure I'm in there, and even if we need to branch off, I'll be available.
Okay, so if I reached out on you in Slack, maybe we could sync up for one of those upcoming office hours together. Yeah,
or
schedule
yeah,
or whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is related to like the changes that were just made for like nerf darting SSL certs and making them off. That was another thing that was kind of like this, where I was available to help. But it was primarily someone outside of NPM doing the work, which is, that's what I'm here to help and facilitate. So
all right, well, thank you so much. I will, yeah, probably catch up with you maybe over the weekend or, soonish. But yeah, down to give it a try at least. Thanks.
All right. Well, I'm going to give people back 15 minutes. We made it through a pretty short agenda, and I look forward to keeping this linking RFC moving forward, despite the shift to office hours instead of the formal RFC meetings. So appreciate everyone's time and have
So
a good afternoon.
Sorry, is that starting next week then? Is
Yeah.
this kind of okay, cool. Thanks. Good luck with the breaking changes.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, bye.
Thanks,
Thanks.
All right, see ya. Bye.